Welcome into the JP and Hack Show, part of the Field of 12 Media Network. This is Season 1, Episode 11, presented by our partners over at Bet River Sportsbook. Of course, I'm your host, Joshua Perry. Pleased to be joined by my co-host, Christian Hackenberg. Obviously, a big weekend with some consequential games, and then we're sitting here on a Tuesday evening doing this thing, and we've got the first CFP release. So we got some meat on the bone tonight, brother.
Yeah, I know it. This is interesting. I think this top six, obviously it's early in the first rankings, but there's definitely going to be some buzz and fuss about it. And I think it'll be interesting to hear the national reaction to it, as opposed to just us being Big Ten guys. But there's definitely some interesting plays. See how things work out down the pipe.
Yeah, and I mean, just, it's all fresh to everybody at the moment we're recording, but, kind of looking at some of the national analysts and some of the reporters that we all know, I mean, a lot of people they've got some comments about what's going on here. And I do think it's really interesting as we get into it, simply because of the way that they have ranked some of the teams. It's a little bit kind of out of the convention of what the AP and the coaches poll typically do. And that's exactly what the CFP is, but I think it's got some people a little fired up. But we'll run through a recap of Week 8 scores, and then we'll get into the CFP ranking. So Rutgers beat Illinois 20-14, Maryland 38-35 over Indiana, Wisconsin again with another great performance, 27-7 over Iowa, Michigan State and Michigan. This was the game of the week, and this was one that we talked about, and we're going to get really in depth on this one. But it was 37-33 in favor of Michigan State. You had Purdue beating Nebraska in a one-score game again for the Huskers, 28-23. Minnesota on a freaking roll right now, 41-14 over Northwestern. And then the nightcap, a little bit of a clunker for Ohio State in ways, and I think Penn State brought a really good performance. The score of that one was 33-24 for the Buckeyes. Getting into the CFP, top 10 here. I'm going to run through it, and then we will discuss. We had Georgia at number 1, Bama at number 2, Michigan State coming in at number 3, Oregon at number 4, Ohio State at 5, Cincinnati at 6. So those are your 4 in, and then your first 2 that are left out of the deal. Then you got Michigan coming in at 7, undefeated, Oklahoma coming in at number 8, Wake at number 9, another undefeated team, and then Notre Dame at number 10. Running through the rest of the Big Ten teams, at 20, you've got Minnesota. At 21, you've got Wisconsin. 22, you've got Iowa. Between the Big Ten and the SEC, half of the ranked teams come from those two conferences, and Cincinnati achieves the highest ranking for a group of 5 team in college football playoff history. So just looking at that top 10 right there, what are your initial thoughts?
I have no surprises with Georgia and Bama. It's interesting too, because this is so fresh. We're starting to get a feel for how the college football playoff does it. It was different even than the BCS when we were coming up, all that analytics and stuff. So I do think Michigan State definitely merits that. And the beauty of them being at 3 right now is that even though there are some arguments as to why they shouldn't be there, they can answer all those questions coming up here down the pipe. So I think that's the beauty of that. And I'm happy that they gave them the nod there. Really being the last unbeaten in the East, right? And then Oregon obviously beat Ohio State, and they've been taking care of business out there. Haven't really let things down. I don't think we get as much coverage of them. So just being on the East Coast, they're not as visible. But they've obviously been doing what they needed to do out there, and will have themselves a chance. And then Ohio State, you and I have talked about it. I think they're top to bottom the best representative right now as it sits of the Big Ten. But we'll see. And then really just having Oklahoma and Wake kind of down there at 8 and 9, like both undefeated. But I think that just goes to show about how they view the strength of both of those conferences. Yes. Obviously the ACC is way down. And with the Big 12 out there, it's interesting. And Oklahoma still has to earn it here. I think they got Baylor still, Iowa State, which always seems to give them some issues, and they have someone else too, Oklahoma State. So that's interesting to me. But I think it's a good starting point. I think it gives us and the fans a lot to talk about. And the beauty is a lot of these teams on the upper end of that still have to go prove some things. So it'll be interesting moving forward.
Yeah, and I think what's super interesting is the thing you talked about in terms of the strength of the different conferences. And I think if you're Oklahoma, you're probably in a little bit of a better position than if you're Wake Forest, than if you're Oregon, honestly, because you at least have some brands and some names that'll turn eyeballs a little bit, turn heads just in terms of performances they could stack up. And being at number 8 isn't insurmountable. It's just not ideal, especially as an undefeated team. The Oregon-Ohio State thing, I think, is exactly what it needs to be. I think Oregon has earned the right to be in the top 4. They've definitely earned the right to be ranked ahead of Ohio State with that head-to-head. And I know people will bring up the loss to Stanford, which is not a good football team. But at the same time, I think that the head-to-head at this juncture of the season should matter, right? And if you're Ohio State, you have every opportunity because you've got Michigan, who's a top 10 team right now, still out there. You've got Michigan State, who is in the top 4 as of right now, still out there. Yeah. And then you'll have one of the teams in the West who would be a top 20 win at the time, probably, to beat in the Big Ten championship if you can overcome those hurdles in the East. So I think that's a really interesting spot to be in for Ohio State. As I look at the rest of it, I feel bad for Cincinnati. They're just not going to get the respect. And they have a top 10 win on the road, which I think should count for something, but everybody's going to point to the rest of their schedule. And I understand that because they're not playing the level of competition that a team specifically from the SEC or the Big Ten is playing, but they're handling their business. And you can know, they have clunky wins, but we've seen teams lose as well. We've seen Ohio State lose. We've seen Oregon lose. We've seen Michigan lose. We've seen Bama lose, right? I mean, teams drop games. The last 2 I'll talk about is I think Michigan has a very favorable spot right now. And it's not to say that they wouldn't have earned that, because losing close to a team that you believe is one of the 4 best in the conference should knock you a ton, but they also don't have a top 25 win. It's not like Ohio State has a top 25 win either. Well, no, Penn State's not in this deal.
Yeah.
So, it's one of those situations, but I think Michigan's got it favorable. The one that stands out to me, though, is Bama. And the reason I say that is Bama would be ranked in the same place, in my opinion, whether they were undefeated or they had the loss to Texas A&M. And it's just wild, right? And they have some work to do at the end of their schedule, but just seeing them at number 2, like, people trust that the Crimson Tide will deliver regardless.
I agree with you. And that's interesting. And where I think if this plays out, if Ohio State or Michigan State runs the table against that 4-headed monster in the East, if one of those teams, obviously one of them is going to run it. So whomever runs it, if they run it, as long as Penn State doesn't play spoiler or Michigan play spoiler here, I think it'll be really interesting to see if Bama loses to Georgia, if they still take Bama. And let's say an Oklahoma runs it, or Cincinnati continues to run it and starts getting hot. Now you're going to sit there and say, okay, we have a laundry list of 1 or undefeateds, and we're going to throw 2-loss Bama in there. Granted, their 2 losses are to great teams, but that's where the real argument starts. Now, if Bama goes out and beats Georgia in the SEC championship game, you take both of them again and you go. Right. But I think if Georgia comes out and beats Bama in the SEC championship game, that's Cincinnati's best shot, as long as they continue to handle business in a dominating fashion. They have to do it in a dominating fashion.
They're going to need the style points 100%. Yeah. If Bama would lose to Georgia in the SEC championship, it'd be the first time a 2-loss team would get in if that were the case. That'd be really interesting to see. I'm trying to think of a scenario where you might be able to talk the committee into putting both Ohio State and Michigan State in there, right? Because if you are Michigan State and your only loss of the season comes to Ohio State and it's a close loss, that is a conversation that people would need to have.
Yeah. The only thing that I think is going to hurt the Big Ten is traditionally, I don't think they've had – it's just going to go back to resume. It's like I think Oklahoma is going to get the benefit of the doubt if Oklahoma goes out and wins, just because of history and how they've how they've gotten in there before and they've been
They shouldn't
consistent
though,
for the
because
last.
they've gotten in there and they've laid eggs.
I agree, but they've still gotten in there and they've still been it. So that'd be interesting. And obviously, us being Big Ten guys, I'd make that case 10 times out of 10. If you got a 1-loss Michigan State and a 1-loss Ohio State, like they're both just to be able to survive the conference in that manner, as strong as it's been this year, you know?
Yeah, no, I'm with you. And this will be interesting as this kind of unfolds week to week. We'll have the conversation about it. I think this first one gives us a lot to talk about and a lot to look forward to as we get into some of these games for the upcoming week. But let's get into a little recapper action. We'll start off with the game of the week. Big noon, it delivered. Michigan State beating the old Wolverines 37-33. Just from my vantage point, and I think we probably share some opinions about this. I think Michigan played well enough to win the football game. They played well enough to win the football game. 552 total yards of offense. McNamara went for 383. They had 406 passing yards total. Defense forced 2 turnovers early in the game. They had one that was overturned, which I know a lot of people are angry about, had 3 sacks in the game, right? So I think they did enough on the surface to say that they should win the football game. But here's the difference. Is Mel Tucker 100% of the time, and he stuck to the script. It was a dose of Walker, 206 total yards, 5 touchdowns, and the defense was aggressive regardless. 4th downs, they were aggressive. They took their chances, and it paid off. And I think we'll get kind of into the recap of what we saw, but just as an overarching idea, I think Mel Tucker, being who Mel Tucker is the reason why he's been able to have success. And I think Jim Harbaugh, in terms of kicking field goals and having a false start on a 4th down and not being able to convert a short 3rd down and having to kick a field goal after that, that's the reason why they didn't come out on top in a game like this.
Yeah, I think you really see Mel. I think he knows his team, and I think his team really plays for him and feeds off the type of energy he presents. I think Harbaugh has that a lot this year, but you have Harbaugh's traditional play the game by the book type of feel. And I just feel like college football always presents those unique opportunities throughout the year with certain matchups and certain games. Game like this, rivalry game, in-state, there's so much going into it. You see it oftentimes, the unconventional and the more aggressive and the team that's really just letting their nuts hang, oftentimes is able to come back and claw back. And it wasn't easy. I mean, Michigan State was down, 31-17 at some point in this game? They were down by a couple scores.
30-14.
Yeah. So to one of the things that you brought up about how they stuck to the script, I mean, to be down like that and still rely on your run game, feed PJ, who I think, or not PJ, Kenneth Walker. I got Temple flashbacks. But
I know PJ Walker.
Yeah. But to feed Kenneth and him be able to produce with explosives the way that they did to get them back in the game in an unconventional way. You know, you're down by a couple scores, you're thinking, all right, we're chucking it all over the yard. No, they stuck to the script. And I think that team just really plays for Mel. I think you made a great point that Michigan did enough to win it, but there's some other stuff that came up that you and I called last week about Mr. McCarthy. And I think with the way that Cade came out, I think Cade answered some questions that you and I had last week. But I think that there was definitely a little bit of disruption of flow, and having been a quarterback, never really having to go through that, but always seeing it, and then also benefiting from the ability to play through a bad drive or a bad series and come back and be able to react and not have to be looking over my shoulder like, hey, is this a substitution? Is this coming in? What am I doing? Yeah. I think that was an interesting point that shouldn't be overlooked. I want to get your thoughts on it.
Yeah, and we had said it. One of the things that we said was Cade was capable of having the big performance, and he had not been unleashed up to that point. And he had that performance. The other thing that we said is when you start subbing the guys in and out, that's where the issues come, because your starter gets out of rhythm and putting a young player in some clutch situations in the biggest game of the year up to the point, the odds are that something funky is going to happen. He had the one fumble, and then they brought him in on the next drive, and Harbaugh said that the second fumble wasn't necessarily JJ's fault. But there was some miscommunication in the huddle that caused that fumble. And I'm not 100% sure that if McNamara was in the game, there wouldn't have been that miscommunication that led to the error. Those are the types of things that happen. And so I think this is a lesson for people just in the game of football, where you think the grass is greener and you want to have the young guy who's probably the more talented player in there. You got to ride the hot hand, man. You got to stick with your dude. Cade put them in a position to be undefeated in this game. Cade McNamara put them in a position to be up by multiple scores in this game. JJ McCarthy is going to be a wonderful player. He has shown some things that are phenomenal. I'm not exactly sure that putting him in that situation was the prudent thing to do as a coach.
It's a funny dynamic too, because I don't think you would have ever seen Harbaugh do this in the past. And,
No.
I'm going to get a little philosophical and deep, but I think it's the direction of college football. It's the fandom, it's the business of it now, and the pressure and the win now, not long term. Everyone wants results, from the fan to the people selling popcorn in the stadium. And that, I think it's just gotten overwhelming. And like I said, it's interesting seeing a guy like Harbaugh, who is such an old school football guy. He's been around the game for a really long time, and he gets that position. He played that position. It's not like he doesn't get that position. And to see him do that, and I think he knew better. That's what I think is interesting about it. Is I think he knew better, but I don't know what it was. But that's definitely something that's very interesting. And I hope he learned his lesson. Because I think that team does play for Cade. I think he's got a unique story. I think he's earned his stripes there, and the veteran experience is what's going to be needed to be leaned upon here to finish the year. And if you want to, get the kid ready for next year, that's what spring ball's for, not Michigan State in a pivotal game during the season.
I agree with that 100%. I want to get on these fourth downs for Mel Tucker real quick, because he got some big ass balls, is I think the best way to put it, because the way he was playing defense, and I've talked about this coverage, and I'll talk about this again with the Ohio State Penn State game, but they do this hot coverage I used to run. We were at Ohio State. It's 2 under 3 deep, and you as a quarterback, you understand that the ball's got to come out quick, but if you can deliver that thing, it's a play. Yep. It's a play, because there's holes everywhere in the secondary, right? And that's what Mel does. He runs an aggressive defense. He plays freaking hot blitzes all the time, 7-6, or they're playing man-to-man, and they're putting their ass out there. And he did not vary from that until the end of the game, where he needed a change-up, and it ended up working out for him. But that's just the Mel Tucker aggressive mentality. On offense, we saw it. 4th and 4, 28 yards. 4th and 1, 40 yards. Most teams on a fourth down, they're doing just enough to convert it. They're handing it to the freaking Heisman candidate and saying, all right, buddy, go to work. Do what you do best. He's like, no, F that. I'm going down the field. I'm not just trying to get 1 yard. I'm not just trying to get 4 yards. I'm trying to get the whole thing. That is the reason right there that these guys are playing the way that they are, is because they have a coach who believes in being aggressive all the time, that the guys are going to get the job done.
And he's consistent too. That's been him all year, though. Like you said, that's been him all year. He's consistent. And when you know that that's the expectation, I think the locker room plays differently. I think the guys approach it differently. I think there's a different attitude to 4th and 1, 4th and 3, 4th and 4, 4th and 2. There's a totally different attitude to those types of situations where most people get a really tight butt. This team doesn't. They don't flinch, and they approach it just like first down, which is, like I said, I think a testament to how Mel runs his program and the expectation and the precedent that he set early on in the year. And I think that's only going to help them moving forward. It might burn them, but where they're at right now as a team, they can only benefit from it. They have nothing to lose, everything to gain.
Yeah, and it helps a team rise above its level of talent as well. Because you can look at this Michigan State roster, and they've obviously revamped, and they've done a really good job in terms of that first recruiting class that they brought in and the transfer portal.
Good job in the portal. Yep.
I mean, they're not they don't have the horses that Michigan had. Michigan's got a better player. They're going to be competitive with Ohio State. Ohio State's got a better player. And it's because these guys, they just play aggressive and it really works for them.
Yep.
Let's move this along. We'll talk about Wisconsin and Iowa again, 27-7. Wisconsin run the ball, playing great defense. And I think the difference between Wisconsin today on defense and where they were at the beginning of the year is now they're taking the football away. At the beginning of the year, they're playing behind the line of scrimmage. You're getting the sacks and the TFLs, strong run defense, understand how to play coverage. But now they're starting to take the football away. And what that does, especially with an offense like what they have, is it gives them chances. They get more at-bats, they get good field position, and they can really win games doing that.
Yeah, and I think the other point is that their offense was giving the ball away and they weren't creating it. I'd love to see what the turnover ratio is now, as opposed to maybe the first 3 or 4 games of the season. Do I think they got enough to make a push? I think with how Minnesota's playing right now, it'll be tough. But if they keep it up, it is what it is. But to me, they still need that other component if they want to be back to kind of the way they have been in the recent years of being the front runner in the West, and it's kind of their thing to lose. I think they still have some issues to address, but good for them. Honestly, it's good for them moving towards the back half of the season here and finishing strong. And then Iowa, man, you just want to talk about a fall from grace. It's uncharacteristic, I think, of a Kirk Ferentz team, but it seems like whenever they hit that breaking point of turning the corner and really being a contender, some stuff like this always seems to happen. And then they finish with an 8-9 win season and everyone claps their hands and they keep it moving, And if that's the expectation and that's the definition of success, then great. But I think these people have now, and these fans and the school has now had enough of a taste of being there and being at the door, ready to get in the club, and then, kind of getting deboed out right as it was about to get interesting. So, I think they have some issues, and I'd be interested to hear your take on it as well. Because that defense has seemed to run out of some magic and the offense is kind of stalled out. I think they've been running the ball historically bad. It's like over the last 100 or something carries, it's like 1.6 yards a carry or something like that.
They had 24 yards in the game. Average rush was 0.8 yards against Wisconsin.
Yeah. And I think going back even 2 games before that, they've averaged like 1.5 yards a carry, and their offense isn't built to do that. They need to be averaging upper 3s, even into the 4 range for them to be able to be successful. And that's what they were doing early on in the year, but they just haven't been able to get that push. And that's what sucks about being a one-dimensional team on offense. If someone takes your bread and butter away, you don't have the horses to be able to compensate. And that's a tough situation to be in.
Yeah. And we'll dive into this Iowa situation a little bit later in the show, but I think you brought up some great points we can expand upon. Want to get to this Ohio State Penn State game real quick before we get on to our next segment. But Ohio State, the winner in that one, 33-24. And let me preface some of the comments I'm going to make by saying that I think that the shine nationally was off of Penn State in their previous 2 performances. I think that people were a little bit down on that team. But one thing that I think you and I both believe, that this was a defense that had a roster that could present challenges to Ohio State, specifically what they could do in the second and third levels of their defense to cause issues. And that's exactly what we saw. And the Buckeyes, one, it was a little bit sloppy. Personally, I thought CJ was above average in the game, but probably not as sharp as we've seen him. Run game wasn't necessarily great, and I think it was a combination of some things that Penn State did up front, and Ohio State's guys were freaking Olayan dudes, which was wild to watch. And then I think OSU's defense was hit or miss, and we talked about the importance of Sean Clifford's health. and he looked like he was very healthy and very confident in the game. And so he went out there and he hit some shots. I mean, he stood in the pocket and he knew that his guys were going to be able to get open. But the glaring issue for me with this Ohio State defense, and you can expand upon this as a quarterback and what you see, is they cannot get home with just 4 rushers. Ohio State has to add a 5th or a 6th guy in order to affect the pass game in terms of getting to the quarterback. And that's a problem because historically Ohio State's been able to do it with a guy like Joey Bosa or Nick Bosa or Chase Young, where they can just get home with 4. And now we're watching them run blitzes. We're watching some simulated pressures. We're watching them, bring 5 and they'll drop a guy out, or even some of the hot pressures that I talked about, which are real risky. And I think that's where Penn State understood that they could eat, was when the defensive backfield was low in numbers. There were going to be holes in the defense, and Sean Clifford was hitting them all day.
Yeah, 100%. And, I think what killed Clifford and what Ohio State's defense took advantage of was the fumble that got returned for a touchdown.
Yeah.
And I think that interception late was massive. I mean, it was the 24-27 game at that point. Penn State had a chance to get right back into it. And that really was a big needle in the air balloon there for them. And that was an ugly pick. It was a ball that I think he obviously really underthrew. And I think if he could have it back, he'd definitely take it back, but he's got to get that out there where only his guy can catch it. And Ohio State capitalized on those opportunities. And I think that's ultimately the tail of the game, right? I was proud of the way Penn State showed up. I think with everything going on and all the stuff that we talked about, and even going back to the college football ranking, like, it's interesting. Penn State's unranked, but it just goes to show you how they viewed that Illinois loss, I think.
Yeah, I mean, Wisconsin's in it, which is wild, right?
Yeah.
And you feel like those teams Penn State's got a head-to-head over them. And at this point in the season, you feel like those teams would still be pretty evenly matched.
100%. And that's where I think it's interesting. But right now, I think for them to have been able to go to the shoe, play the way they played, understand that they made some mistakes that they shouldn't have made and ultimately cost them the game, but still have showed up with all the noise and all the BS on the outside, it's a good sign. And honestly, they're still in position to play that spoiler role, right? They could still have a great season. They could finish strong, playing a great bowl game, and really, really mix some things up if they go out and beat a Michigan or a Michigan State here towards the end of the year. So happy with how they showed up, but ultimately, like you touched on, I think Ohio State did just enough. And I think this was a great game for Ohio State and a great learning experience for CJ to have a great test. And he even played well in the Oregon game, but to have a test and come out on the good side of it, I think it's going to bode well for them and the maturity of the team moving forward.
I agree with that. I think resistance at this point is good. It almost felt like things were getting too easy for the Buckeyes, and they started reading the press clippings a little bit too, which is never a good thing. So it's a wake-up call. You're glad to be able to win gritty. But I agree with you on Penn State. Like, I think that there were multiple chances that they were in the game. I think that they played really, really well on both sides of the ball outside of a couple of turnovers. Like, it was a really good performance. And ultimately, they're not dead, right? And their record might not reflect the feeling about this team going into their final few games. You feel like there's an opportunity for them. Yeah. And they can salvage what's going on.
Yeah, 100%. I still think they really need to address some issues up front. I don't think they're running the ball as well as they need to, and as well as a team that's going to be a real contender. And I think they hid that early on in the year with explosives through Clifford and kind of the one thing I've gotten to know is I've watched more of Yursich. He's a little gimmicky for me. I don't think he has a consistent ebb and flow. There's a lot of differentiation between game and game in terms of game plan and approach. I don't think they could really say like, hey, we're great at this. They're kind of a jack of all trades and a master of none type of team. And I hope they kind of figure that out as I hope they give them some time. I mean, they've had 5 offensive coordinators in the last 8 years, which is
that's a really interesting thought though, right? Because I think what he wants to do is something that definitely gave Ohio State some challenges, and that's put the ball out on the edges, use the screen game and the RPO game is an extension of the run game. And then, kind of hit some things down the field. But it's interesting to hear your perspective that it's not necessarily a system. It's more of a game plan type of offensive attack. And I think there are other coaches like that, and you can be successful, but I don't think you can really build into something without having a true identity.
To me, it's not sustainable because there's always going to be a point in time during the year or a game where something isn't going to go exactly how you lay it out. No matter how good you are as a game planner, there's going to be things that don't work out. And what hurts you is you don't get the reps at that. Like, to me, I think it's really valuable to have a small package as an offense that you can execute versus anything. Perfect example was we played Maryland my junior year. And it was right when they fired whoever, I don't even know who was the head coach, but when Loxley took over, and they had been a real conservative defense. Like, they played like quarters, like bend, don't break, not a lot of pressure. We roll into this game and they go 0 the entire game. Like, they're bringing the house, nothing. So for us, fortunately, we had some experience with that type of stuff. So we were able to kind of adjust, go back to stuff that we were running in training camp, but we got enough reps at it. To me, if you don't have that bread and butter and that identity of like, this is our stuff and we can execute against anybody, it's really, really hard when you get put in those types of situations to be able to just go out and execute in like a spring ball type manner really efficiently and just move the football. And I just, like I said, I just watching Penn State this year, I just get a lot of ebb and flow. They go unbalanced against Auburn, and now, there's a lot of different junk in there and a lot of gadgety things that they use, and that's fine. But I just haven't seen like a bread and butter. Like, this is who the team is, but they also have this. It's kind of like we just game plan and roll it out there and put our guys in some situations and hope we hit a couple shots. It's hard. And I think it goes back to not really being able to establish a run game, because it's massive.
Yeah. I mean, 33 yards in the game against Ohio State, average of 1.1 per carry. It's definitely not going to get you going. Yeah. And that's something I guess I'll be looking out for the rest of the year, just kind of how he rolls out the game plans. Let me tell you about our sponsors over at Bet Rivers Sportsbook. If you haven't signed up yet, Bet Rivers is offering a $250 match bonus for your first deposit. But what sets them apart from everyone else is that they require just one playthrough to turn that bonus into cash money. With their new Rush Pay instant approval, withdrawals are not only fast, they are safe, secure, and reliable. Go to betrivers.com today or download the BetRivers iOS app. Must be 21 years or older. Gambling problem, call 1-800-GAMBLER.
Yeah.
Let's switch it over to our next segment. We got some big thoughts coming for you. First thing I'll start off with is Scott Frost and Jim Harbaugh. And after their respective games, there was a lot of conversation about those two coaches, just their tenures in retrospect. And I think the overarching idea for both of them is that they are who they are. And the programs are in two totally different places, where I think Michigan, they want to be what Ohio State is. They want to be what Penn State has been at times. They just haven't been able to get there. But they're 9 and 10 wins a season, which is, I think, what a lot of college football programs would want to be. Really good recruiting.
Yeah.
I just – there's some good things going on, but they haven't beaten their rivals in Michigan State and Ohio State. When you look at Scott Frost, I think that it's a different thing for him, is the fact that they've been close, but they have not done what they've needed to do to get over that hump. And it's been a thing over his tenure. Like, his losses are rarely embarrassing in terms of the margins. They're embarrassing in terms of some of the ways that they've lost games, but yeah. That they're in a situation where you feel like they're close, but they just haven't been able to do that. I think for Michigan, expectations were in hell coming into this year. Like, nobody, anything, they've exceeded that for sure. For Scott Frost, I think that people were optimistic, and now they're back down to reality. What are you seeing out of these two situations?
I think you bring up great points. I think they're in two totally different stages of program development. I think everyone is waiting for Michigan to turn the corner. And you bring up an interesting point about preseason expectations. And it's just been I think Michigan fans have been so hungry for that, and they've been so close. Like you said, they've had 10-win seasons. They've had really hot starts, and then they finished really weak, or super inconsistent. It's been a big letdown. I think Michigan is at that point now where I think Harbaugh definitely, from a job security standpoint, has done some really good things this year and put him in a situation. But now I think that the leash gets shorter moving forward because you've now proved that you can do it with a team that wasn't expected to achieve it. So now we got to see you turn that corner and start becoming elite and start competing and start beating the Penn States, start beating the Michigan States, and start beating the Ohio States, and putting Michigan back on the national stage in terms of a competitor for the big dance at the end of the year. And then I think Scott is in that point of just becoming relevant again, taking a historical program, a historically heralded program, and bringing it back to relevance and bringing it back to really just consistency. And you haven't really seen that. And the one thing that you and I had talked about, and they're on a couple of these notes, is just the way that job looks to the field and the attractiveness of that job right now is not super high. And I think it's one of those situations, similarly to how you described the whole JJ McCarthy, Cade McNamara thing, is the grass may not be greener in this situation. And it'd be interesting to see how the AD and the administration and the board views that and how they attack it, because I don't think that they're going to be able to go out and grab a grade A hire. I think Scott was a grade A hire given the circumstances, and I think he's got some stuff that he's got to sift through still. But I think it would be worth just riding it out here for a few more years and seeing what he could do. I really think it's going to be coming down to getting a guy as a trigger man that can be super consistent, because the offense is plenty explosive. The defense is good, is really good. They got a bunch of athletes over there.
Yeah, they do.
I think just getting a big time difference maker at that quarterback position who's consistent. I think Adrian's a difference maker, but you just never really know which two is going to show up every Saturday. I think getting a really consistent guy in there at that position could be a massive thing for Scott. And I think that should be priority number one for him moving forward.
I agree with that. And it's interesting for Scott Frost, because I know a lot of their Huskers are actually really torn on this, but I know that there's a voice out there that's ready to get rid of him, and they think that they could bring in whoever they want. And they're kind of living still in the 90s. And I've had this conversation, but Nebraska is a good job, but it's definitely not a great job.
It's not a top tier job anymore.
No. And I think the biggest reason behind that, honestly, is what is your recruiting base in Nebraska, right? Because we see teams in the West that are kind of in those outposts of Iowa and Wisconsin, and Nebraska would be one of those locations where you have to be a developmental coach. Like, you have to take a chance on some guys who are under recruited and underdeveloped in high school. You have to make them really good players. But what you do when you're in that situation is you put a limit to how good your team can actually be. Like, as good as Iowa and Wisconsin can be, I don't think they're ever going to be Ohio State and Alabama. It's just not something they'll do. And Nebraska has national championship aspirations. You don't want to be a developmental program. But if you bring in a guy who is an ace recruiter, not necessarily the guy who is the best developmental coach, you're putting yourself at a disadvantage, because I don't even think like Urban Meyer could bring the type of players that they need to bring in to be what Nebraska was back in the 90s. And that's a really tough spot to be in.
Yeah. And like, where's their pool? Like you said, like, are you going to go down and compete in Texas with everybody getting their hands in that cookie jar? Are you going to go out to California? Like, how many kids are going to leave California to come and go to Nebraska? You know what I mean? You're in such a weird spot geographically. And I think, to your point, I think they have the resources, they have the facilities, and they have the backing and funding from a booster and administration standpoint in terms of money to be able to get that upper tier of developmental guys. I think they can still get a couple really, really good immediate impact players there, just because of everything that I just said. But there is definitely going to be an element of developmental, but I think they have an edge just because of the history of the program. Like I said, the funding and all that stuff over the Iowas and even the Wisconsins of the world, because because of everything I just said. And I think it's a unique situation because they can go out and win the West every year and put themselves in a situation to go and win the Big Ten. And if they just so happen to stumble out there and beat somebody up in Indy every year, or, once every couple of years, like that's a great success for them. And I think that should be the bar. That should be their definition of success. It's not going to be, national championship or bust. It's going to be get to the Big Ten championship game. And let's see if we can make some, shuffle some cards and ruffle some feathers and see if we can throw our hats in the ring. But they just got to get there. And like I said, I think it really starts with Scott getting a guy who's going to be there for 3-4 years, who can pull the trigger and show a lot of consistency and stability at that position.
Yeah. And to your point there about their backing in their financial situation, there's some people that believe that they'd be willing to pay $7 million to the next guy that comes in. But they also got a large buyout situation with Scott if that's the direction they choose to go. So I'd be curious to see there. Want to get your thoughts real quick on 4 teams. We got Minnesota and Michigan State as really present surprises. For Minnesota, what is the thing that's clicking for them right now?
I think PJ, and it's something that you've talked about, PJ just does a really good job of developing identity and finishing the year strong. I think that's a huge testament to him as a coach. It's the energy he probably brings to that locker room every day, the team meeting room, and the expectation level. And the one thing that I've always said about Minnesota, moving into the dog days of a season and the asset that they really have, especially after losing Mo in week 1, was that offensive line being a veteran, really big, really talented group. And that offensive line, I think, puts Tanner in situations where he can still make plays. And offensively puts them in situations where they can still move the ball on the ground. So I really give a lot of credit to those guys being able to grind out that back half of the year. The defense has slowed down. Everyone's wore down. Those guys up front just being a real rock for that team right now, I think is massive. And then obviously, like I said, PJ, and huge tip of the cap to him finishing strong.
What about Michigan State? We talked about them a little bit earlier. But,
yeah. I think the balls that Mel has. I think Kenneth Walker's a difference maker. I think if you put him in any situation, he's playing as well as he is right now. He could do that anywhere in the country, in any conference. He's a really special talent. He shows some great explosiveness. He's a guy who can catch the football out of the backfield. Stop, go, has it all. I think he's a really, really complete prospect, super dynamic. You have a guy like that, and you're able to create some movement up front. You don't have to be dominant. It's similar to how Penn State was when they had Saquon. You don't have to be dominant. Just give him a couple creases, and he'll end up making 3 or 4 explosives a game for you that are just game-changing plays. And then I think Peyton Thorne's played well enough at that position. Obviously, last week had some issues with turning the football over, and it's kind of cooled off really, I think, since that Rutgers game, right? Or did he had a big one after that, right? He had one big one after that, but he's kind of cooled off a little bit. The last 2 have been
clunkers. Indiana and Michigan weren't great.
Yeah, but I think with Jalen Reed and Naylor is the other guy, correct? Those guys they can create separation against man-to-man. Obviously, big-time problems in zone coverage. They can take the top off. So I think they have a really unique balance. And then defensively, they just go. They lay it all on the line, and they go and they attack. And they have a lot of good things rolling for them. And that's a dangerous team. It's like a wolf backed into a corner right now, and they're taking full advantage of that. They're nothing to lose, everything to gain.
Yeah, and Naylor's got a little bit of a hand deal. I don't know how much it's going to keep him out of the game plan, but I did see that he was a little banged up. So I'd be curious to see what they do as a replacement there. Let's flip it over to some teams with some questions. Penn State, your alma mater, obviously on a little bit of a skid, and Iowa's the same thing. What are you seeing from Penn State that they could improve on?
Yeah, I think kind of what we touched on earlier. It's just consistency and some things that they can execute against anything. Really finding some identity, and like I said, I think it really starts with the offensive line and some form of run game. It's just really hard. It's a tough position for any quarterback to be in when everyone knows the whole game's on your shoulders. I went through that a little bit. We struggled running the football when I was there my last 2 years, and it's a really tough position to be in. And They're obviously a lot better off than that. We just coming off the sanctions, depth issues, the whole nine. But I would have expected them to make more strides at the offensive line position and really be able to establish the run game a little bit better than they have. I think defensively they bounced back. They answered the bell after that Illinois debacle, and were able to present some issues for Ohio State, which is good. And like I said, proud of the way they answered everything and all the noise. I think it just is one of those unfortunate things where have a tough loss against Iowa, your guy gets banged up, throw him back out there against Illinois, can't really do anything, and then you got to go up against a team that's really hot in Ohio State. And you laid it all on the line. You were in it. You had a chance to win it. Just the way the schedule works out. So we'll see. I look for them to finish strong. I think they're going to put up a great performance against Maryland this weekend and finish the year strong here. And like I said, they have an opportunity to play some spoiler, which is always fun. They're kind of in that nothing to lose situation now too, which also makes them dangerous. And then Iowa, I don't know, man. Like I said, like I just we've talked about them, man. I just think them being so one-dimensional offensively, and we were talking about it, and they kept proving us wrong the first 3, 4, 5 weeks of the season. But what they were doing defensively was not sustainable. And if that's your bread and butter, and that's what you hang your hat on, it's going to come back to bite you in the butt at some point.
Yeah.
And just the lack of ability to run the football is really, really been a killer for them offensively, because they don't have the guys to go and separate. They can't play one-on-one matchup football anywhere. It's heavily dependent on their ability to run the football. And it's just, it's not a good situation.
No, it's a bad situation, as a matter of fact. And so I'm curious to see how they end up finishing off this year. Let's get into our third segment, some week 9 previews. We'll start with Ohio State, favored by 15.5 over Nebraska. There's a road game for the Buckeyes. So let me just ask you this simple question. Is this one of those games that Scott Frost is going to be able to keep close against a really good opponent?
They proved it early in the year. I think when you're talking though Ohio State and Oklahoma, I think they're two completely different animals at this point in time. Ohio State obviously battle tested now, having played and beat a really good team, a really good defensive team. It'll be interesting to see. I think ultimately the biggest thing is going to be Nebraska's ability to take care of the football, and if 2 shows up to play or not. I think if 2 shows up to play, takes care of the ball, and doesn't kill them, they got a chance to be in this one. If they shoot themselves in the foot, and I know it's basic football, but that's really what it comes down to, because I think they have the talent, and I think they have the edge, and they haven't been a letdown team here. Like you said, the margins have been close. It's just they just haven't been able to turn the corner for whatever reason. I think if they come out and play a really clean game, I think it's going to be closer than most people expect. But ultimately, I do see Ohio State pulling away here probably in the second half and taking care of business.
Yeah, I think this defense for Ohio State right now, obviously they give up some shots, and Martinez will be able to take advantage of some plays, but they're a havoc team. They've done a really good job of getting sacks when they do blitz. They've taken the football away. They've scored on defense. Those are all the things that I think Nebraska would want to avoid in an opponent. So that'll definitely be an interesting matchup there. We've got Illinois at Minnesota. Minnesota is favored by 14.5 in this one. And quite frankly, I think that line might be a little bit low based off of what we have seen out of Minnesota lately. Heavy dose of run game from either team. This should be a very short game, but I see Minnesota being able to really pull away in this matchup in a way that's going to be pretty convincing. I
agree. I think they're hot, and I think all eyes should be on Minnesota. It's not going to be a matter of Illinois is a non-factor in this game. It's going to ultimately be all in Minnesota's locker room and how they handle things and how they take care of business.
Wisconsin favored by 12.5 at Rutgers this week. So here's the thing is Wisconsin is probably going to win this football game. But what I need to see from them is some variety on offense. And we keep talking about it. They run the ball really well, and we understand that. And they found ways to win the football game running it. But I just don't think that is a sustainable game plan when you really start to talk about a team rising above its level.
I'm gonna tell you what, man. I might be going out on a limb here, but I've been a Rutgers rally guy. I love Schiano. This might be the game for Rutgers this year where they can go and get that signature win here to kind of really ruffle some feathers. It's a slim chance, but I'd say watch it. I think if Rutgers shows up, defense plays hard as hell like they have been all year, and puts Wisconsin in those situations where Five's going to have to go out and beat you throwing the football.
Yeah.
I think it could work out. I think it could be favorable for Rutgers from that side of the ball. And then ultimately it's going to be if Rutgers can muster up some type of offense.
That's what I was going to say. I don't
really
think they can
defense.
score points, man.
And if they can't do it, then that's going to kill them. But
yeah,
like I said, it's at Rutgers. It's in Piscataway.
Yeah.
It's in Piscataway. It could line up to be it. So maybe that'll be me going out on a limb here with a possible one. And I could be dead ass wrong. I probably am dead ass wrong. But like I said, I got to give Rutgers a little love here the back half of the year, as much love as I was giving them in the beginning of the season.
I like it. I mean, I'm a fan of Greg Schiano as well. I love Rutgers and what they are doing as a program trying to build. I just think points are going to be super hard to come by for those guys. Yeah. Penn State favored by 10.5 at Maryland. So here is the Maryland thing is Talia Tungavailoa is back. He threw for over 400 yards in a game against Indiana. And that version of him is dangerous. But what we have seen is when he's going up against these really good defenses, he ain't very good at all. And Penn State would be one of those defenses, especially with Maryland being down a couple of weapons at wide receiver, that'll give them some challenges. Now, if you're Penn State, I think this is a real opportunity to run the football, to be an offense that is balanced and shows consistency, because this Maryland defense has showed some issues as well. But I think for Maryland to have any type of chance in the game, Talia Tungavailoa is going to have to play out of his freaking mind. He's going to have to take care of the football. He's going to have to take some chances and really come up big. Otherwise, it's going to be Penn State all the way.
Yeah, I think this is the perfect get-back game for Penn State because I think the matchup you highlighted in Talia and a slightly handicapped Maryland offense as it pertains to their weapons against that Penn State defense, who has yet to really completely disappoint outside of that gashing that Illinois put out on us on the ground. I think that's interesting, but I think that back half of Penn State's defense is going to probably create a couple turnovers, give the offense some short fields. And I think you make some great points. It's an opportunity for them offensively to really establish a run game and hopefully find some definition and some identity here moving towards the back half of the year. But I think it's a perfect get back game for them heading into a really tough end of the month.
Yeah, it'd be something I'll be definitely looking forward to. Now, this line is a little bit fishy here. We've got Michigan State at Purdue. Michigan is only favored by 3.5. And I say this would be a bigger issue if Michigan State came out in the CFP rankings and they were number 2, because Purdue always beats the team that's number 2.
Slayer.
But they're number 3, so it makes me feel a little bit better. This line is super duper fishy, though. I mean, we're talking about the number 3 team in the country. We're talking about a Heisman Trophy candidate at running back. We're talking about a team that has one of the best wins in college football right now, and they're only favored by 3.5 against a Purdue team that you don't know what the hell they're going to look like when they come out on Saturdays.
Yeah, I mean, that's the biggest thing is you don't know what Purdue team's going to show up. And for that reason, I think Michigan State's been playing really consistent. And I think I agree with you. I think it's really fishy. It's interesting, but I think Michigan State wins pretty big here.
Yeah.
2 scores.
And I think this is one of those games where the Purdue offense could end up looking like what they've looked like at times, which is turning the football over, and Michigan State will thrive off of that. Yep. They will thrive off of some of those turnovers.
Yep.
All right, we got Iowa favored by 11.5 at Northwestern. So Northwestern was one of those teams a couple weeks ago that had a little bit of life. They controlled their own destiny in the Big Ten West, and then they proved to us that they're just lacking overall with playmakers. I don't think the defense was as improved as we thought they might have been coming off of the bye week. But here's an Iowa team that has some real problems, and like you said, can't run the football. Don't think the quarterback has necessarily played great these last couple of outings, and he was a little bit banged up coming out of their game against Wisconsin. It's a defense that I think is really questioning what they actually are. And so maybe this game doesn't get blown out by 11.5 points. Maybe this is an opportunity for Northwestern to say, okay, if we want to make a statement here in the West, we can get a gettable Iowa team that people had confidence in early on.
Yeah, I'm going to go on the record. If I'm a bettor, I'm staying as far away from this game as possible.
Agreed.
I'm staying as far away from this game as possible because I think you bring up great points. I think it's two cars, missing a couple cylinders here. They're pissed. They got a couple locked up pistons, man. And when you get in, it's going to be just a sloppy slugfest to me. And I like I said, I'd stay away from it. It's nothing I would even mess with. If you're into some sloppy football, go check it out. But I think that's what it's going to be. I think it's going to be some bad football, some sloppy ball, and it's just going to be a good old fashioned slugfest. So yeah, I'd stay away from it.
I'm staying away too. And all of our lines are, of course, from our friends over at Bet Rivers Sportsbook. Our final one here is Indiana at Michigan. Michigan is favored by 18.5. And if Michigan really is the number 7 team, like I believe that they are in the way that they've played, they should probably win this game by 24. And Indiana showed some life and some guts in this last game. And their backup quarterback, McCulley, is actually a pretty good playmaker. He's a guy who's mobile, and I think he threw the ball better than we anticipated coming off of that performance where he had to step in against Ohio State. But in saying that, they have some real issues. You talk about a team that cannot run the football. This is a team that literally cannot run the football. They ran for 17. No, I'm sorry. Let me get this right. No, they rushed it well for 204 in this game. But this was the first time that they had run the football well. And I think a lot of that is because of their quarterback being a run threat. They're bad up front. And when you look at their defense, they've had a couple of issues, right? And so I think if Michigan is going to continue to be in a conversation about a team that is a top 10 program, they have to get into this Indiana game and really prove it.
Yeah, I think Michigan, from a defensive standpoint, is a very stout football team. You highlighted they still took the ball away against Michigan State. I don't think Indiana has a Kenneth Walker behind the quarterback there. So I think Michigan defensively matches up really well. Indiana struggled against those types of teams. You go back, you look at it. The Penn State blanked them. I agree with you. I think Michigan should win this game. And yeah, I think 24 is a great number. I think they got at least 3 scores in them. Michigan's going to have to too. Just again, going back to what I say, finishing strong, doing what you're supposed to do, being a team that is going to try to still make a run at something because you're still in it. If you go out and take care of business, I think they're going to have to. So I'm looking forward. I'm looking forward to it. I hope they let Cade rock out and that defense shows up.
Yeah, and our producer sent us a note here that Stephen Carr, who's the running back for Indiana, had a 66-yard touchdown run. I think he went for like 136 in the game. It's probably the longest run they had all season. I mean, their rushing totals have not been very good. They had a 34 banger in there. They had one that was 69 yards rushing, 77 banger in there. It's just been really inconsistent. But he also dropped us another note. McCauley, who is the backup quarterback, is a dude. I do agree with you, Austin. A very good player who looked like he had some issues when he had to step in. Probably didn't expect to play, but after a week of practice, man, he can present some problems. And so Michigan will definitely have to be on the lookout for that. But I think if they can bottle up McCauley and force him into some unfavorable situations as a young quarterback, they'll be able to run away.
Yeah, I think that front seven's good enough. I think that front seven is definitely good enough.
Well, we have reached the end of our show. We said we were going to keep it under an hour for our producer, Austin, to get this thing chopped up. And I think we did a pretty good job. But this is the JP and Hack Show, part of the Field of 12 Media Network, Season 1, Episode 11, presented by our partners over at Bet River Sportsbook. Again, Joshua Perry, my guy, Christian Hackenberg. We'll be back again with the best coverage of Big Ten football you can receive anywhere. Stay tuned.